Hi everyone, welcome to this installment of the IPBES webinar series, delivered to you by the IPBES Task Force and Technical Support Unit on Capacity Building. My name is Håkon da Silva Hyldmo and I will be guiding you through this session. We're happy to be joined today by Dr. Larigauderie, IPBES's Executive Secretary. She will present for us on government participation in the upcoming external review period of the IPBES assessment on land degradation and restoration and the 4 IPBES regional assessments. This presentation is the first of several aimed at facilitating government engagement in the upcoming external review. In subsequent webinars, we will be joined by the co-chairs of the various assessments, who will present and answer questions on the key messages and the draft summary for policymakers of their assessment. We hope you will join us for those sessions. For now, however, we look forward to hearing your presentation, Anne. The floor is yours.
I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which is dedicated to the review of the land degradation and restoration assessment and of the 4 regional assessments of IPBES, with a focus on the involvement of governments in this review. I will ask my presentation around 3 key points. First, we'd like to share with you some background information on these 5 assessments, which we are reviewing now, how they are structured, what the review process consists of. Then we will, in our second point, look at why it is so important for governments to become involved and what resources they have at their disposal. And 3, we will then share some of the processes, the key points in the review process, so that governments then know how to submit their comments in due time. So starting now with a little bit of a background on the 5 assessments. This particular review here focuses on 4 regional assessments of biodiversity and ecosystem services, namely in Africa, the Americas, Asia Pacific, and Europe and Central Asia. And it involves close to 500 experts altogether. And in addition, there is a 5th thematic assessment on land degradation and restoration, involving about 100 experts. So IPBES defines an assessment as follows. It is a critical evaluation of the state of knowledge by selected experts. These experts are going to interact as they develop their various drafts with governments and with their peers in order to ensure legitimacy, relevance, and credibility of the entire assessment process. Second, on this same slide, we also share with you some important terminology regarding the composition of an assessment in the 4 following parts. First, an assessment report, which will be the large volume which will come out of this 3-year process. It will start with some front matter, followed by the summary for policy makers, including key messages. Then, as a third component, the chapters. The chapters is really the bulk of that report, typically hundreds of pages, while the summary for policymakers would be about 20 pages or so. And finally, what we call back matter, which is developed at the end and includes glossary, acronyms, and such items. So focusing a little bit more now on this third part, which is the chapters. This is what is developed first. This is really what is the main content of the assessment, and it's along the chapters which are given to experts by the plenary in the scoping report. The chapters will be reviewed 3 times over the course of the assessment. We will review the first order draft, and this will be done by external experts, meaning experts who are not part of the assessment. Comments will then be included to develop a second order draft, which will then be open for review by external experts as well as governments. Again, comments will be taken into account to develop a final draft, which will go to the plenary. The green arrow which you see here shows that we are at the second stage here for the chapters, meaning that we are reviewing their second order draft, and that it has benefited already from a first round of review by external experts. Coming now to the summary for policymakers, which is the second component of the final report, about 20 pages or so. This is developed in parallel with the second order draft of the chapters, since it is based on their executive summary. It will be reviewed 2 times. Its first order draft will be reviewed by external experts and governments. It is part of the review that we are talking about now, and it will then be reviewed a second and final time, going into the plenary by governments. And the arrow you see here shows that we are currently in this review focusing on the first order draft of the summary for policymakers. This slide that you see now gives you a summary of the process that is being followed over the course of 3 years to produce the 5 assessment reports, going on the left from the launch of the process with the approval of the scoping report that took place back in January 2015 at the 3rd plenary of IPBES. That scoping report is basically a developed outline which gives the set of chapters and a broad description of what they should contain. Following this, assessment experts are selected by the multidisciplinary expert panel, and they then have almost 3 years to do their job, which will then be completed in March 2018 at the 6th plenary of IPBES. Over the course of these 3 years, there will be various drafts, which I have explained before, and the red rectangle that you see here shows where we currently are, which is at the review by governments and experts of the second order draft of the chapters and the first order draft of the summary for policymakers of these 5 assessments. The dates correspond to the review period. I will come back to that on my last slide. So in summary, and repeating again, what is open for review? So for review, we have each one of the 4 regional assessments of biodiversity and ecosystem services, which has 1 summary for policymaker and 6 chapters. And for the land degradation and restoration assessment, we also have 1 summary for policymakers and 8 chapters. So we have a total of potentially 5 summary for policymakers and 32 chapters to review. However, governments can review whatever part of all of that they like. And there will be flexibility in the process to do so. I come to my second point now, which focuses on governments' involvement in the review. So why is it so important for governments to review the assessments? Well, governments, first of all, have requested these assessments, so this entire process here is carried out in response to their requests. But in addition to that, the involvement of governments at regular intervals during these review periods is really key for the following. It increases the credibility, but also the legitimacy of the assessments. It ensures policy relevance. If, for example, a government thinks that there are some aspects that are not policy relevant enough for their particular context, they can request at this stage additional material to be included. The review will also stimulate ownership and uptake of the outcome. This is, of course, the ultimate goal. What we really want is uptake by governments of the content of the assessments in their policy making at both national and international levels. And finally, the review will provide a key opportunity to request changes to the text and to add new perspectives. And so this is really the moment in the review of this second order draft of the chapters to request for additional content to be inserted and past that point, it will no longer be possible to add new content. So this is a unique and final opportunity to do this in the life of these 5 particular assessments. So what resources do governments have at their disposal to carry out this review? So it starts with this presentation that I'm making to you now, and which is available online. And there will also be assessment-specific interactive webinars with some of the experts of each one of the assessments, and an opportunity for governments, particularly national focal point, to engage with these experts. The dates will be given in my next slide. And 3, there will also be a set of physical regional dialogue meetings where IPBES national focal points will be invited to meet with assessment experts over the course of June to August 2017, and I will come back to that in my next point. This is a table which shows the timeline for the webinars. As you can see, some of them will be given in different languages, and the timeline will also be placed separately online. Coming now to my third and final point in this introductory webinar, focusing on how to review an assessment. So prior to the review, each government would set up their own review process, and of course keep in mind that these are only suggestions and that each government will adapt to its particular context the suggestions that are made here, which are themselves based on lessons that we've learned during previous reviews. So it would be important ahead of the review to already dedicate some staff/experts for particular chapters and to particular summary for policy makers. It would also be important for the national focal point of a particular country, as well as, or in addition to these experts, to participate in the webinars, to interact with the experts of the assessments. And finally, it would also be good to reach out to additional experts in the country, in universities, in institutes, in NGOs, perhaps in business and private sector, so that they also become aware of the opportunity of the review, and so that they can prepare and send comments themselves to the review process. Now, during the review, the key stages are, of course, to register, to access the draft, to review them and submit comments using a template. And this is what these various boxes here explain. So you would register going on the IPBES website, which would have all of the information. You would then be invited to click on a little box where you basically commit to not cite, quote, nor distribute the drafts. Based on that personal commitment, you would then be able to download the chapters and also the template for submitting comments. We expect that there would be a form of internal meeting or process at the government level to discuss the comments, and in particular the key messages of the summary for policymakers, and that in the end the governments would submit comments to the Secretariat through the designated national focal point. We would like to stress that it would be important for us if we could receive only one set of comments per assessment per government. This slide explains how to fill the review template, which would look like what you have on this slide here. Governments and experts would be invited to comment. We would like to stress that we are not asking for comments regarding minor details or editorial mistakes, but comments that focus on substance as well as on the overall balance of the drafts. Ideally, and I repeat, each government would submit one template per assessment, which would compile comments received for several or for all of the chapters, as well as comments pertaining to the summary for policymakers of that particular assessments. The comments should be submitted through the designated national focal points. The columns that you see on top should all be filled, including the reviewer's affiliation, indicating if this person represents formally their governments, and then, of course, very importantly, chapters and page, beginning and end, and the comment which is offered for that particular set of texts. And also, where relevant, we would like to invite reviewers to indicate a reference to a particular scientific publication. So, following the review period, we intend to hold a series of regional dialogue meetings, and those will be organized by the technical support units for the regional assessments, as well as the technical support unit on capacity building. And there are many objectives which are listed here, including on the part of assessment experts. These dialogue meetings would tremendously help them to understand how their work, how the assessments are perceived and received by governments, in order also to allow them to better address the comments that would have been received in writing form, and to better prepare for IPBES 6 for this dialogue that they will then be having at the plenary with governments' representatives. And for governments, these dialogues would offer the opportunity to interact with experts to better understand the content of assessments, to refine them also and increase their policy relevance, and to also prepare for the approval process at IPBES 6 as well. And the bottom of the slide here includes information on when and where these various regional dialogue meetings will take place and be held. So in summary, and starting to wrap up now, what can you do to engage in the review of these assessments as a government representatives? So first, to establish national structures, mechanism to participate in the external review process, start thinking about the experts who could review various parts, think about how they would interact, how you would be then compiling the comments. All of that is what we mean by establishing structures or mechanisms. So that's number one. Number two is to participate in the upcoming webinars, to interact with the assessment experts, as was mentioned before. Three is to participate as the national focal point in the regional dialogue meetings relevant to your country. And fourth, of course, to participate actively in the approval/acceptance process of the chapters and of the summary for policymakers at plenary time, at the 6th plenary in March 2018. So I end this presentation with the key dates for this review. There are two dates basically to remember. The first one is that the review period for the assessments of Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, and land degradation and restoration will be between the 1st of May and the 26th of June 2017. 26th of June being then the deadline for submitting written comments on the template. And for the assessment of the Americas, The date is 29th of May to 24th of July 2017. So, of course, we are here to address your questions, and there will be again additional resources to support governments in these reviews. It's really crucial that governments actively get involved in the review of these assessments, and IPBES count on governments for reviewing the drafts of these 5 assessments. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so very much for a very interesting presentation, Anne. Before wrapping up, I would just like to remind you all again of the upcoming webinars on the key messages and draft summary for policymakers. Separate invitations to those webinars will be sent in early May for the webinars on the regional assessments on Africa, Europe and Central Asia, and Asia Pacific, and the thematic assessment on land degradation and restoration. The invitation for the webinars on the Americas assessment will be sent in early June. Thank you for watching. We look forward to have you join us again. Goodbye.